Let's go. Another week. We're already first week of September here in full AEP ramp mode. So just in the grind, really getting ready for it. This year's been more difficult than normal. We've talked at length about that, and we're gonna kind of talk a little bit more about some of the trending topics going into AEP and how you as an agent can roll with these things and be a good agent. Where do we want to begin, Dan? We kind of have some of the hot industry news. We don't want to belabor the point, but
I think we'll dive into some of the specifics of, the things unfolding this week with non-commissionables and SARs and things like that. But I would just say before we do, again, in general, I think we've echoed it on other episodes, that what's making it difficult this year for distribution, for agencies, and for agents to kind of get a game plan together is just the lack of information and the timeliness of the information, to where normally in a given year, there had been such a good cadence of information of when that you would have all these months to kind of piece together like your budget, know areas that you're targeting, know which parts of your book of business were kind of vulnerable or that you needed to service. And you had a lot of ability to kind of execute a very solid plan. And this year, because of that lack of communication and transparency from all of the carriers, like, look, we understand that they're all trying to navigate all these funding changes and new regulations and trying to still be profitable to shareholders, but just that lack of communication and transparency has made it really challenging on the entire supply chain. So that's, again, setting the table for this episode of just what would give us really good, I guess, cadences and time, again, where business planning and your strategy is going to be crammed into a fire drill in a 2-week time period.
Yeah, it's funny. We're having conversations that normally happen 2 or 3 months earlier, where time frames are very much compressed, and you have annual or first looks still. I mean, by the time you hear this podcast, Humana will have come out with their first looks, but everybody else is kind of almost...
Do we even call them first looks at this point? Are they final looks? Because of how much can change now finally into September?
Yeah, it definitely feels more like on the ACA side of things, where you find out what plan design and things look like and premiums the week before, like window shopping, like everybody else, just a little bit of a preview. But ANOCs, I've heard, are already going out. I've heard some Aetna people have already got some of their annual notices of change.
So because of some of our listeners who have chimed in and said, like, you guys use a lot of acronyms and talk about all this stuff, and can you explain them more? An ANOC, annual notice of change, is the letter that actually an insurance company needs to send out to a beneficiary.
Legally required.
Yes. So every year they have to send out that annual notice of change of the benefits, the premiums that are changing, the co-pays, everything that impacts your member. They have to get those out before October 1st, right? So that's an ANOC. What's different this year is because some of the carriers are also doing SARs, service area reductions, and removing plans. Those also have to go out prior to October 1st. Now, what's been, again, different this year is usually in the past, I could go to a carrier partner and say, hey, when are those dropping? And they're just being like, SMF, you're just like everybody else. You'll know as soon as you start getting phone calls. So we're not really getting clear communication about when the SARs are going out and when the ANOCs are going out. But we're kind of starting to get the phone calls already that some of the carriers are starting to do that.
Yeah, you have to have a secret data analyst to basically do, the math and figure out where they had plans and where they're not going to have plans. And, specifically the two that have been had a lot of SARs this year that haven't really set it with very much clarity are Aetna and Humana. And it's basically been like, you kind of got to wait and see and find out where and when those are going to happen. And it's made strategy really difficult, right? I think there's going to be a lot of agents this week that find out they're significantly impacted, and all agents are different, but there definitely are agents who are more localized, where they write a lot of one carrier in one county, one state, one plan. And we've seen it before, where we've seen agents that have had massive blocks of their book of business disrupted by a SAR. And I do think there's a little bit of, an advantage to being diversified across multiple states, multiple carriers, things like that, because you're not so dependent on a bad year. We've had agents that have had to spend their entire AEPs and OEPs essentially just rewriting and rolling
Well,
their
and
blocks of business.
yeah, and there's the yin to the yang. I mean, there's the counter to that, right? Where we've also had agents who have just by luck, have been existing in marketplaces that have been really steady, really vanilla for 10 plus years. And they've never really had any sort of SARs or area reductions or big drop-offs in benefits. And so they've been able to do very minimal work to maintain their books of business. But then when disruption does occur, they've built blocks of business of 1,200, 1,500, 2,000 clients. And suddenly that's the cumulative effort of 10 years of hard work, and there's just no way they have the ability to service everybody in 8-week window and just get to it all. So those people, to your point, are going to be significantly impacted, where they may only be able to save half of their book of business that they've built over a decade.
Yeah, and it's looking like Aetna, is going to be SARing 800 to 600,000 to 800,000, and Humana anywhere between 500,000 and 600,000. And I'm just hearing rumors. This is unconfirmed yet, but I'm hearing the major areas and major states where Humana. I guess we'll see if we're proven right.
Go ahead and shoot your shot, because by the time this airs, it'll be out, right?
Hearing that it's going to be Florida. A lot of lives, a lot of policyholders in Florida, North Carolina, Georgia, Texas, and Illinois. So I'm hearing that's where the bulk of Humana SARs are going to be. So we'll see if my intel is good. But that's going to be majorly impactful, right? I mean, Florida's been one of their flagship markets back from the OG days of the Tampa Mafia. Shout out to where Humana grew from.
Care Plus, is there in Florida.
Yeah, as I'm looking at it, if those are true. Georgia, even, it looks like there's some markets where costs or competition are more of the issues there overall, right? Georgia's become highly competitive.
Well, like everything, so people need to understand what makes one carrier profitable versus another. You're in the same marketplace, right? So there's a couple of things so if you're all things are not equal. So let's say there's 5 Medicare Advantage companies in one marketplace. Well, you have to remember, one, it's going to go off of star ratings, right? First and foremost, if you have a plan that's at 3.5 stars and you have another one that's at 4 stars, there's a lot of counties in the country that are double bonus counties where there's a big incremental increase in pay when you go to a 4-star rating. And there's also counties that have a double bonus. So when you're going from 3.5 to 4 stars, it's a huge jump as far as the reimbursement to the carrier, okay? So that's first and foremost is that. The second thing is going to be, does that carrier or that insurance company own any of the doctor networks, the hospital networks, any of those other facilities in there, and can they negotiate favorable terms, right? So those are other things that really factor into it. And then you're also going to look at, distribution and, does that particular insurance company have its own distribution or even preferred distribution partners where they're going to naturally get a lot of business? Or do they have to spend a lot of money on their customer acquisition in those areas? I mean, there's other things we can go through.
Well, networks and cost of care, and you have hospital networks that want to get paid more. They want to renegotiate their contract rates, things like that.
Yeah, maybe one carrier has a 5 or a 7 year deal that they negotiated years ago with favorable terms. A new plan came in, and obviously they just are having to come to the table and negotiate in 2024 rates, not the rates of 2017. So these things all really, really, really matter. So it's not like, well, why is it that this insurance company's figuring it out and they have good, profitable plans and this one's not? There's a whole list of variables that go into that. But I think the gist of it is you're seeing it from these companies as saying, we're in the business to make money. Like, we're a business. We want to make money. We want to insure people. We want to provide value and quality and everything else. But at the end of the day, why are we going to provide coverage to members that lose us money?
Yep.
We're not going to. So let's identify where our situation, based on all these things I was just talking about, if they don't line up well and we're not going to be profitable, let's just exit. We have to, essentially answer to our shareholders, and we have to hit our EPS. Let's just get rid of our plans there.
Well, and then you have, as we've talked at length with the funding cuts to Medicare this year, there's the trickle down effect of that too, right? Which is the hospital systems and the networks and the providers, because they all want to get paid, right? Their costs are all going up. They want to be profitable. So they continually are going to these carriers and trying to renegotiate higher contract rates, more favorable terms. And there's really this Cold War emerging between a lot of the MA specifically and any of these insurers, and then the actual providers and the hospital networks and the groups, because everybody's now going to have to be scrambling and competing for a decreasing amount of overall dollars in the ecosystem.
Right.
So you have that emerging,
and of course the payers or carriers or insurance companies, however, depending on who you are and how you want to name or describe them, the ones that are vertically integrated, that own some of these parts in the supply chain, are going to have very distinct advantages, particularly as things continue to get more difficult.
Yeah, because you can take dollars from one hand and put it in your other hand, and if there's just a little bit less, you're okay.
You go like, oh, I have this reimbursement amount that's really high. Boy, that sucks. Let me just take it out of my left pocket and put it into my right pocket. It's problem solved.
Yeah. The other thing is, when you look at where some of I appreciate the way, I know you can't say anything good about them right now, but I appreciate the way WellCare did it, which was, they did it right, where they said, hey, we're exiting these 6 states early. And it was because their reimbursement rates, most of those states were at a 3-star. They were having a hard time being competitive. And so it was easy for them to say, hey, we're going to exit right there. And so I definitely appreciate that, because we've been able to plan for those beneficiaries ultimately, because that's, at the end of the day, who we got to make sure gets taken care of. It's nice to be able to protect your residuals, your block of business, but ultimately we need to make sure that we take care of these beneficiaries.
Well, and you have to remember that that's the business that we're in, regardless of your supply chain, of whether you're a provider, you're an agent, you're an FMO, you're a carrier. At the end of the day, if you're focusing on having a good experience for that consumer, that Medicare beneficiary, whomever it is, that's the person that, if that's your focus and you're like, I got to make sure and take care of that person, you're going to do well. The other stuff tends to work itself out.
Yep, absolutely. Well, the other, we've belabored the point of WellCare going non-commissionable on the PDPs.
It's not even news at this point. It's everybody knows. It's been, the hot topic for weeks now. Everyone's ready to storm the castle.
Yeah, geez, you read some of these agent forums and stuff, and you'd think they stole their firstborn children and personally bankrupted them, and I'm surprised they're not all walking around with armed security right now because of how vilified they.
I don't know. We were supposed to say that public, but I do know that there is an individual or two that actually has now had to have security detail.
Well, I didn't know that. I was just making a joke about it, but that sounds,
in reality, yes,
sounds ridiculous.
Right.
But anyway, we know that'll work itself out. To that, along those lines, kind of, United Healthcare came out this week with their new, commission guidelines, and essentially had
commission amendments.
The commission amendments had a pretty large list of plans that are not commissionable.
Yeah, and let me just say, so United Healthcare does that every year. If you've been doing business with United Healthcare,
all carriers do.
Yeah, you have your contract in whatever year you executed it. Let's say it was 2014 or who knows when, 2007, whenever it is. Your organization, whether you're an agent and you're contracted with your social security number, or you're an entity with your TIN, you're contracted with them as a vendor. And then every single year they'll send you amendments, right? And it's, hey, here's what we updated. Here's how your pay is changing. Here's the products in the states you are going to be commissionable and able to sell in. And here's the areas where it's going to be non-commissionable, or we're now paying on HRAs or VBEs, or we're not. So any of those changes that they're making to your vendor contract essentially with them, it now goes through CIRCON, where you log into your CIRCON portal, you download those amendments. And I will say that I've been shocked over the years. I had 2 of our agency partners reach out to me in the last few weeks and be like, hey, where can I get a copy of my contract for that? And I'm like, do you not keep a copy of you're a vendor, they're a supplier. Do you not ever keep a copy of it and read it? And
no one has filing cabinets these days anymore.
Dropbox, Google Drive. I mean, whatever. Do you not save it though, and ever read your actual agreement ever? But surprisingly, maybe not surprisingly, most agencies do not even read their agreement. But yeah, because a lot of people were pissed talking about the WellCare thing, being like, you can't do that. And it's like, actually, if you read through the agreement, oh, I guess they can. And United Healthcare sent out their amendments anyways through CIRCON. And I think that surprised a lot of people because there was 4.5 pages of areas where they are making plans non-commissionable. In all fairness, though, I haven't reviewed, and again, going back to lack of information, I haven't matched up, though, which of those areas they're also introducing new commissionable plans. So,
well, not only that, but we don't know like what the membership was. It seemed like a lot of plans, specifically in
New York,
Florida, maybe Virginia. I'm trying to remember off the
all
top
of Wisconsin.
Of my head.
I mean, there was.
So it seemed like a lot, but you wonder how much total membership those are, or if they're even plans that are competitive.
Right.
I don't know. It'd be interesting, if you comment below if you're listening on YouTube and let us know if you know that you're being significantly impacted, because we haven't ran the membership analytics on there to know what the total, percentage of non-commissionable plans there are.
But to be clear though, they are paying renewals. So like if you're an agent and you've had existing business on those particular, they call them HICNs or PPPs, on those particular plans, you are still getting your renewals. They're just saying that, any one of 25 applications, if you do somehow, typically in my experience, they take them off all the quoting tools like Sunfire and Connecture DRX. They no longer let brokers order paper kits. That's usually how it goes. If you somehow have the ability to sell the plans, you won't get a commission. But typically what they do, and again, I'm not speaking on behalf of them, but typically they'll introduce new plans, kind of saying, hey, don't sell this one anymore, sell this one instead. And that's the same thing, just in full. Prepping for this podcast episode, I didn't have the time to go pull hundreds of different HICNs and look at the star ratings, but I would suspect that these are plans that are either low performing, that are 3.5 stars or below. And when you introduce a new plan into a marketplace, you start off from a funding environment, you start off at that 4-star mark, reimbursement rate for the first 2 years until they can gather enough claims data and information, HEDIS and STARS information to actually appropriately rate the plan. So my guess, again, is that that's probably what's occurred in these areas.
And that's what I think people are going to continue to realize has happened in addition to all these actual SARs. Every major carrier has a substantial amount of plans like that where they've essentially not reduced them or exited, but they're going to kind of send them out the pasture, so to say.
They're kind of like, we're going to
introduce new plans.
Yeah, we're going to keep our revenue and our membership that we have here, but our growth is going to come from this new plan. And again,
and usually they'll make those benefits obviously better,
right?
And then you just naturally want to either move people there, or they'll see those benefits and choose that plan.
And call the broker and be like, hey, this other plan from this insurance company that I'm already with has a much better offering. Please move me to that one. So this is one of the things that I think at the crux I want to talk to frequently, to our audience, to everybody listening. I mean, we get a lot of reach now with this. It's been something that really frustrates me. I will just be honest with you. I've never been more pissed off in my 17 years in the industry as I am this year, in the fact that just the term, the shit rolls downhill in the supply chain, to where I just think that FMOs and brokers have been just so vilified in this past year that I take that really personally because of obviously the passion and the engagement and the things that I have in the industry, but also just my understanding of the whole supply chain. It's not really a fair statement that the FMOs and the brokers are getting the brunt and the finger pointing of like disruption and friction and all these problems with Medicare beneficiaries. Like, look, if a carrier is allowed to, and again, to the carrier's point, they're just gaming the system. They're following the rules and they're following the guidelines that CMS establishes. But if I'm an insurance company and I have these plans in a marketplace that are at 3.5 stars, and there's no restrictions on how many plans I can have, what's to prevent me from just introducing more plans that are getting a 4-star funding environment right from the get-go, and I'm making more money on every member I'm putting onto that plan? And so from a strategic perspective, these carriers are constantly sunsetting, so to speak, old plans, getting rid of plans, bringing in new plans. Here's more plans. We're going to segment. Here's a plan that's heavy for vision. Here's a plan that's heavy for dental. Here's a local PPO. Here's a national PPO. Here's a PPO for veterans. Here's a, there's no limit to all these plans. And then essentially the message is, oh, it's those crappy brokers and FMOs greedy for commissions and changing people because they want to get commissions. It's like, guess what? You're wrong. We would rather do a great needs analysis, put them on a plan that works and leave them there. But we can't control that the insurance companies come in every single year with new plan filings, dangling a shiny object with a new plan and better benefits. Of course, that person wants to go there. And that's not the broker and that's not the FMO.
Yeah, it has been interesting how FMOs and agents have kind of become the straw man for the industry to beat up and kind of like blame a lot of the fraud, waste, and abuse and issues with the industry as the fall guy, so to say. And if you look at, I think we spend, $4.2 trillion on healthcare. Of GDP in healthcare in this country, which is more than, I believe, the whole GDP of a country like Japan. And if you look at what agents, what brokers, what FMOs make in commissions to help people with these very important decisions, it's such a small, minute fraction of the overall piece and the cost of these rampant healthcare costs and insurance costs and government costs and expenditures that what agents, a well-compensated good professional gets out of that whole, those dollars is so minute and small, and yet somehow
it's become a focal point.
Yeah, it's the focal point, and we're becoming the focus from CMS and regulators and Health and Human Services and the insurers. And it's like, well, we're the easy fall guy because there's, whatever that reason may be. I always try to keep, my 1984 Orwellian ideologies out of the. You
didn't wear your tinfoil hat today.
Yeah, so I can't really expound on my conspiracy theories too much, but what we're compensated is such a small dollar amount.
It's a drop in the bucket the big picture, yeah.
And we serve just such an invaluable part of the whole system. I think there was something that you wanted to talk about. Commissions.
The bigger thing that I was going to mention too is that part of the reason that they're under pressure is because of the way that the formulas work in the MLR, the medical loss ratio, and the formulas, in that 85 cents on the dollar has to go into benefits and to the beneficiary in the actual product, and only 15 cents on the dollar can go into expenditures and expenses, which includes profit and everything else. And broker commissions currently are under that 15% threshold. I've made the argument for years to say, if you actually are a really good broker and you're providing services, let's be honest, everybody's wanted to cut out brokers from the equation for forever, right? Because nobody likes to pay a sales commission. But at the same time, the products that exist in Medicare and the marketplace, they're very sophisticated products. They require a good broker with a lot of knowledge to navigate people through these decisions. It's not like when you go to Home Depot and you're looking at different grills and you're like, this one has an extra burner and this one has infrared versus that. Those are very easy buying decisions. Everybody's health needs are very, very different and sophisticated, and access to care and facilities and medication. It's a very different process. So again, I kind of look at that and go, if a broker's doing a great job in providing that value, there's really a very fair argument to say those commissions should actually go into that 85% of the equation as, a service and part of the benefits that the member is receiving in the sales transaction, not the 15 cents and the expense. And so I think that's why there's pressure. I think if anybody ever listen,
what's the average profitability for these Advantage plans with the MLRs? We're talking 3 to 5%.
2 to 4 is common.
So what Dan's explaining is when there's 15% of the, let's call that's the piece of the pie that a carrier could possibly be profitable.
Expenses,
and
overhead.
That's because of the structure and the MLRs that are set in place with how much they're able to keep. When push comes to shove and it's like, well, how can we eke out some more profitability?
Even if they were to say, then fine, then 83-17, 86-14, move the goalpost. I've seen government move the goalpost all the time. So why can't
we can do it willy-nilly, just
why can't you move the goalpost by 1 percentage point? We can stop talking about it, but
so that's why the commissions on these plans become so under pressure on specifically on Advantage plans and PDPs is because when the MLRs are tight and they're asking for, a couple more percentage points of funding from the government and it's not there, and they just got to really tweak the needle a percent or two.
And you have to remember, and then they're squeezed between their shareholders too, right? Because a lot of these companies are for profit. They got to kick out, let's say, anywhere from a 2 to 5% profit, right? And they have shareholders here, and you got CMS here with reimbursement, and it's all squeezed with 15% to play with. I mean, that's why it's so tight.
Brokers become the HBO subscription out of your cable bill that you got to cut out when times are tough.
That's Hulu for me, not HBO. I'll keep my HBO Max over Hulu.
Yeah, that's true.
Disney. Disney Plus was actually the first to go for me, but that's another podcast episode we could talk about.
Streaming services.
What a steaming pile of garbage, Disney Plus.
Dan and I used to work for the cable company back in the day, so we have interesting analogies and watching the whole ecosystem go on back from channels and complaining to streaming to back where you basically have channels again.
It was funny, like when we used to sell, Comcast back in the day, and you would sell people like this bundled service, and people would complain about the price. And we're like, if you were to rip those apart though and have to pay them all separately, it would be so much more. And now here we are today, where, like, to your point, you're paying for Paramount Plus, you're paying for Disney and Hulu and Netflix. I want to watch that UFC fight. Now I got to have ESPN. Now I got to have this. And
ESPN 8, the Ocho.
I'm like, dude, my bill is massive. It's way bigger. Take me back to the Comcast days where I just get like
so one bill. Yeah, those are the old sales days, door to door.
I digress.
The origins. Yeah,
maybe somebody will get a kick out of that.
Yeah, so we're always sympathetic to the sales individuals. We know that sales make everything work. It's easy to, for financial decision makers, especially the bean counters, to go, well, look what we're paying in commissions and look what we're paying there, and let's cut those out and squeeze those out. And, I really think that we've appreciated our friends at the carriers that we know when they've been under pressure, when they're really advocating for us as a critical piece of that supply chain as FMOs and agents, and really knowing that, we're the ones that move the needle. And for some of these carriers across the country, still the vast majority, the bulk of enrollments, the bulk of service is done from agents, brokers, FMOs.
Yep.
And, we're really, the other thing that we're seeing in the industry, as we've talked about in prior podcasts, is we're moving into an era of optimization, and there isn't as much ground, undiscovered territory, so to say. There's more people on Advantage plans. There's more people than there ever have been before, and the ceiling is kind of compressed a little bit more, so there's less just wide open spaces and
for growth.
Yeah, for Advantage plans, and so you're going to see more competition and more optimization there.
Yeah, well, and people need to understand there's always going to be a certain percentage of the population. So when you look at Medicare numbers, this is something for, like, I don't know, Jared Strock or for Telos or someone at CSG or Deft Research or somebody to kind of come out with. But there's a certain percentage of the Medicare beneficiaries that are never going to be on Advantage plans or Med Sups, because there's still, as much as it's kind of weird, there's still a lot of retiree plans out there. Whether you're federal, state workers, work for large companies, like I don't know what that percentage is, if it's 10, 15, 20% of people, but like, there is a chunk of people that are always going to be on those employer retiree plans that you're never going to get a crack at. And so when you're looking at like a 53, 55% MA penetration, and then you have another percentage of people who are just, I don't want to say ignorant in the term of like being demeaning, people who are just not educated, ignorant people who are like lower income, who are just, Medis as we call them, like Medicare, Medicaid, they're not on anything. There's always going to be a couple of those people who we call it the gravy train. They don't want to disrupt the benefits that they're getting in the gravy train, so they just stick the course. So you're always going to have a couple percentage points of people who are just Medicare, Medicaid, who never get on anything. You're going to have a certain percentage of people on retiree plans, and then you're going to have that segment of the market where Medicare supplements are a great fit. So where
people are still working.
Yeah.
Yeah, they haven't.
Yeah. Or there's these eligibles that really haven't taken their Part B, or, so there's not that much left of the pie to go get at, is what I'm saying. It's maybe 10, 15 to 20% total that we could go grow into.
Of these unaffiliated, people, these subscriber growths, right?
There's just not that much more to get to.
And then you get the age-ins, right? We're still in the silver tsunami. We still have 10,000 plus 12,000 people a day turning 65 in this country, and I think that will plateau somewhere in 3 to 4 years from now. But we're definitely not in the past 10-year cycle where it's just been to the moon growth. The sky's the limit, and more plans, more carriers, more expansions, growth every year.
Yep.
So a little bit of optimization there as as you're going to start seeing plans compete more. We think that over the coming years, there's going to be more consolidation, more wrapping up of some of these companies that are more vertically integrated, that are able to weather these financial storms a little bit better. And, I don't think that we're going to see quite as many of these little fly-by-night local and regional MA carriers as we've seen in the past. I don't know if you agree with that.
I agree with that, because also the reimbursement environment's not as attractive, right? Like, you always look at behaviors and you look at segments and industries and wherever the money is. Like, when the government announces that there's rebates for clean energy or what do you see? You see like all these green companies. When you have federal subsidies, when you have money there, suddenly that industry just goes and booms, right? And it's just like, our industry has boomed for a long time in Medicare, but as the reimbursement rates get lower and lower, and it's not there, it's just not as attractive for these. If it's a health system, it's not as attractive for them to build a health plan. When you're doing Medicaid, it's not as attractive for you to go enter into the Medicare Advantage space, right? Because that opportunity for profitability is just not there like it was. So
well, and we already know that there's quite a few of those little small local and regional carriers where
there's a lot of them this year.
They're on the tilt.
They were already scratching their head, going, should we just throw in the towel or not? We saw some of them, a few. I still think that that's a trend, as we're quoting Steve Warner again, turbulence for the next 5 years. I think that over these next couple of years, you're still going to see many of them kind of going, let's see what happens this year. Let's see what happens this next year. When you start getting into year 2 and year 3 of not making profitability, even when you're in a nonprofit, we talk about nonprofits all the time, but how it's like, it's ironic that it's a nonprofit, but yet people in leadership make boatloads of money and have really cushy pensions and everything else. But when it starts to not pencil out, that's at some point you got to just throw in the towel.
And their salary and their benefits are going to have to start being cut, and they're under pressure, and they're going to be either acquired or have to fold up and roll up shop. I think if this funding environment continues, we already saw that a lot of these carriers kind of pull up stakes and get out of the MA space, and I think you'll see some carriers probably do that in the ACA space as that gets more fierce and competitive, and
I agree,
and things like that. And
but I would tell you too, though, like from my perspective, I would like to see. They did it on the ACA space this year, where they went to certain the carriers and said, hey, you can only have so many plans per each metal tier in a marketplace, because if you really look at your benefit offering, there wasn't that much of a delineation from this plan to that plan. That consumer is only going to experience a difference of $200 out of pocket from this plan to that plan. You need to have a more streamlined portfolio. Boy, I would love it if there was actually some kind of restriction on plans for carriers where they couldn't just have unlimited numbers of plans to file, because that's one thing that would bring a whole lot more stability to the marketplace.
Yeah, because it's not good for these consumers to have to be essentially trained to chase $100 benefit every year. It's hard for brokers to keep good quality retention. It's hard.
And let's be honest too, when you're in a marketplace and you have 30 plans that you want to become an expert on, and really, I used that term, by the way, to agents listening, expert, not to consumers, because that's a no-no to call yourself a Medicare expert.
Yeah.
But superlatives, But the whole point is, it's hard enough to really know the nuances in 30 plans in the marketplace and how this plan has different access to care to that plan, and how this one has a deductible on the prescription drug versus that one. This one has these value add-ons versus that one. Oh, and here's the dental provider with this one versus that one. When you really start to look at the intricate details of 30 plans, there's a lot to really and we would always pride ourselves on being very knowledgeable that way. But then when it goes from 30 to 40 to 60 to, there's some marketplaces, like I'm going to call it like Harris County, Texas, spots in Florida. If you
Southern
look at
California.
Miami-Dade, Southern California, these areas, there's some plans that have like 100 plans available at this point.
You've got up to 150 Hickens in the zip code.
So then how do you really expect a broker to go from 30 to 50 to 100 and know everything perfect? Oh, and by the way, if they screw anything up, you're going to string them up a tree, with a CTM. And the moment that there's any friction and somebody calls in, that broker was just, that bad broker. Let's give them their stripes.
Well, that, and then it promotes churn, right?
Correct.
When we got into the industry, there was one main dominant carrier, maybe two carriers in local vanilla Utah, and it was conceivable for us to have a 97, 98% retention year over year. In fact, that was to be expected. And it was rare if you lost somebody, it was like, well, what the heck happened? Did they die? Because, and those were very attainable and achievable metrics, but now there's just so many different plans and so much different competition for that churn and things like that with these different plans in the market that's probably not great ultimately for the beneficiary ever. So we'd be in favor of some more stabilization and optimization when it comes to the amount of plans available in a market. We get why it is and the finances around it, but it just makes it difficult. Yeah,
but let's go back to understanding and credit where credit's due, right? And if we look at the consumer movement and retention rates and everything else, let's at least have that understanding of why people are moving. And it's not because the grubby, greedy broker is trying to go flip plans and make commissions. Right?
Yeah. So let's kind of end with what makes a good agent, right? Because we've kind of talked about it on these past few podcasts, but what I've seen and what's kind of annoyed me a little bit as I've seen some of these non-commissionable things be announced is a lot of agents showing their personal bias either towards advantage plans or supplements or vice versa. And what I see is a lot of agents that think their way is the only way, that they know better, that they're, and I'm almost a little bit amused when I read a lot of these comments of like, well, I'm going to coach my client to this, or I'm going to propagandize my client to think this or believe this. And it's like, well, you're not a good agent. And ultimately what's going to win is if that client has had a really good, thorough needs analysis, if you've spent time with that client and explained all of their options for them, done a thorough needs analysis, and then presented them with their options and had them choose, and then they know why they're on that plan, and they could explain it, right? And even as we've grown some of our virtual and our telesales channels and things like that, that's been one thing that I've really explained to our agents, because our agents are virtual, and it's like, not all of our, just we have some channels that do that. And I've always explained, when you wrap up with that consumer, let's say it's over the phone or whatnot, and they start instantly thinking, well, what did I do? They need to be able to, explain to their spouse, to their daughter, their child when they come over, why they made that plan change. And they need to be able to explain why they made that decision. Not that some person just, and this goes for any sales encounter, whether you're doing it face-to-face or whatnot, they need to know why they chose that plan. And then they need to almost be able to sell that to anybody else that's trying to convince them otherwise, right?
Right. And one of the things that we've always done, like it's always been my style, like any of our agents who are listening can probably attest to this, is that when I used to sell Medicare plans, because I'll be honest, I've been out of the field for a number of years now, but to your point, the goal was to educate and be really thorough and really say, I'm Switzerland. Like, I'm going to educate you on all these options, because I wanted that person to make the choice, so that way they took ownership and accountability for their choice. So that, for example, if I was really good at explaining a Medicare supplement and they bought a Medicare supplement, when they called me back to complain about the premium increase, it'd be like, hey, remember, I talked to you about this. You're going to have, like, at the anniversary, you would typically have your premium increase. And then you're also going to have, like, an increase based on claims data and claims experience. Like, we talked about this, remember? Oh yeah, you're right. Okay. So it's not me. I didn't sell them on anything, and I didn't try to, like, twist their arm into anything. They chose that after I really educated them. Or same with Medicare Advantage. Hey, here was the plan. You know that they change their benefits every year. You could have their network change or access change. Let's look at other options, but I told you about that, right? So same with our agents when they onboard, like to Mike's point, they have different options. They could be a direct pay field agent from carriers. They could be an LOA agent. They could be an employee. There's a lot of different types. We like to educate. That person needs to make the decision what's right for them. And then again, if they're unhappy, you just go, you're the one who made the choice, not us. And that's the sales process that we actually like typically.
Well, and what we find is, like Dan said, whether you've sold somebody an Advantage plan and they want to get on a supplement, or, what you see a lot of times, and what I'm always amused on is how many people are still supplement only. Medicare Advantage plan is the devil. I just watched Waterboy this weekend with my daughter. Like, that's the devil. So it reminds me of.
Well, but it's funny. But some of these MedSup agents too that only do that, they can't even tell you the difference between, like, age attained, like community rating, anything. Some of them don't even know about.
They can't talk about value-based care and how that works and why it's beneficial and what the actual model is. They can't talk about outcome-based care versus fee for service and things like that.
Some of them I've been talking to just literally get on a tool, run a quote, and it's like, that's cheapest, that one. Yeah. An N's an N is an N.
And then they're like, and whenever anybody tries to talk to you about one of those Medicare Advantage plans, just tell them they're the devil and call me.
Well, then it's like a G is a G.
Yeah. And I'm like, well, and any of our agents, if they ever encounter your person that says they're the devil, well, just like the water boy, Bobby Boucher, will eventually figure out that his mom doesn't know everything,
right?
And that somebody else takes the time. That's a really obscure Waterboy quote.
I was just going to say that is a low quality movie. That is probably one of Adam Sandler's worst movies.
Yeah, that's some high quality H2O. So if you don't do a good job of, like, explaining someone's options, because there's been times where I think my personal bias would be they should get on an Advantage plan and they choose a supplement, or vice versa, where I think that the client should be on a supplement and they're like, I want to go on an Advantage plan. I've had it work both ways, but at the end of the day, I did my job. I explained what that client's options were, the pros and the cons of each direction, and they made that decision. And then those clients are the ones that are going to feel good and are going to be the ones that you don't have to worry about. I'm just constantly amused by how many agents think, like, well, I'm going to send a letter, or I'm going to coach all my clients to tell them never to say this or never to talk to this person or whatever, because.
So, and a few other things that you're talking about. So sorry, I'm far away from the mic there. I had to catch myself. The other thing we're talking about, like, the initial sales process. And I think overall what we want to be talking about in this episode too is just, we're painting a picture overall of the industry of, hey, WellCare decided not pay commissions on PDP. UHC just announced 4.5 pages of non-commissionable plans. There's going to be plan exits from Humana. The environment is shifting, and what we're ultimately saying is that brokers, the broker scrutiny and what they're paying in commissions and the value of the broker community and how they play a part in this ecosystem is going to be nothing new. This is going to be ongoing for the next 3 to 5 years, in my opinion. And so I think that the most important thing we're talking about is, how do you as the broker continue to provide more and more value? So we're talking about the sales process and a broker being valuable that way. But even at the sales process, let's say you're writing a Medicare supplement, do all the paperwork very thoroughly, do the e-app, make sure you do everything correctly, you set it up properly. If you're doing an Advantage plan, make sure you're actually putting the person's actual real email address and phone number, not like, I don't want them to contact my client, so I'm going to put in a bogus phony phone number and a bogus email address so that they can't manage my client. If you keep doing that crap, you are going to be one of the reasons that the carriers continue to make these decisions to say, we don't even get that good quality anyway with these brokers and we don't need them. Let's come up with alternate models, you know?
Well, and a lot of that comes from people think, especially on the PDP side, that if they put their real phone number and email, that the evil carrier that they're trying to place the business with, ironically, in the first place, is just going to call them and convince them to get on an MAPD anyway. And two things, I want you to know that happens way less. A lot of times, if you're a field broker, those carriers will carve out a lot of those blocks of business from their telesales teams. Trust us, we know that, and they're probably not getting hit up from the carrier as much as you think they are. Because but not only that,
if there's an attached broker or record, they typically leave those alone.
Correct.
They're only marketing to internal house accounts, kind of a thing.
But not only that, if you did your job as a broker, what are you concerned about? If you put somebody on a supplement and a PDP and they know why they're on that, then you shouldn't be concerned about somebody trying to sell them an MAPD. You should be concerned if you didn't fully explain it and somebody else calls them and takes the time to thoroughly explain both options and how they work, and that sounds appealing to them, and then they go on that plan because you didn't do your job as a broker in the first place.
Right.
So I'm seeing that trend. I see people talking about that all the time, like, I'm not going to put the right contact information.
Right.
Well, guess what? The carriers then just have to spend more money. They're going to do data enrichment. They're going to find that consumer's information anyway, or the first time they go access care and have to actually use the plan and they go to the pharmacist or whatever, they're going to collect that information, or they're going to pay another entity to collect that information. That's another trend we're seeing, is that, you know, you're paying third-party services to collect that data.
Which in their minds, they already paid you a commission and should have already been captured with it.
Yeah,
right?
and I can't remember which carrier it is, but now it's Cigna, right? They're paying an extra like $25 to put their name and their phone number and email on there.
Valid information. So Cigna is, and that might be a trend that you continue to see, because if you go back to it, and it's not only just that, but there's also this critical part, and you're going to start seeing other services emerging where just know that there's going to be the broker involved in coordinating care even, and trying to schedule, you know, your visit at a value-based provider, and trying to get you in for an appointment so that you can have your routine annual physical, so that you can actually get your colorectal screening, you can do your mammograms, you can do these preventive services. I envision, we are already seeing and having conversations, models that are emerging in which carriers are willing to pay for that stuff. Because why? Because they need to do all those things in order to deliver quality care, to boost their star ratings, to also boost, from the consumer's perspective, their CAPS scores, everything else, to continue their funding environment. And so the broker can continue to play a very critical part in that relationship, but you need to stop being stubborn and fighting it, and get involved in doing a great job for the carrier and for the beneficiary, and playing that vital role in tying those parties together, not, you know, fighting it and trying to go bucket. You know what I mean?
Ultimately, guys, being a good broker and doing a great job is the antithesis to everything, right? That's the solution to all these potential issues. If you're a great broker and you really are taking care of your clients like you say you are, like you think you are, they're going to be happy and things are going to work out for you long term. If you're trying to circumvent and obfuscate the system, and you're trying to make things difficult, and you're trying to go against the grain, you're going to eventually be weeded out of the industry. And the other thing that we didn't really talk about with getting this collection information at time of enrollment is all of these carriers are really struggling with like TCPA opt-ins and permission to contact and things like that. And so they're trying to obtain these critical opt-ins so they can communicate with these consumers that you're selfishly thinking, well, I'm not going to put their information on there because I don't want anybody else to have record or telesales to talk to these people, you know? And they're going to find solutions. So you might think you have a temporary stopgap or workaround, but ultimately, you know, the market's going to win and the solutions are going to present themselves, and you're probably not going to be a part of that.
And you have to understand too that when they're trying to, how often do you hear from brokers too who are like, yeah, my client's getting harassed to do like a health risk assessment and stuff
all the time.
They won't leave them alone. It's like, did you explain to your client like what they're trying to accomplish with that, and to like what the purpose is, and them trying to actually be a health insurance provider? Well, no. Well, of course they didn't. And now the client's just pissed off because they're getting, quote, harassed from the health plan, right? Well, but a lot of times they are trying to establish, what other services that person needs for them. Maybe they need coordination of care. Maybe they need home health care. Maybe they need a new oxygen machine, or their concentrator, like whatever.
Well, they're trying to get, also they're trying to get them to get their preventive care done. Right. And we know that seniors, and specifically men, are notoriously resistant. We have our own father, we have our grandfather, and many people, everybody knows somebody who refused to go in and get preventive care done, and that lump or that bleed or that whatever has metastasized. And then when they finally are in such pain, or it's so bad that they go in, it's so late, right? And so there are legitimate reasons with these value-based care models why they're trying to get your customer to go in and do these things.
Or even like we coach and train agents to say, if you're putting people on a plan, whether it's a PDP or an MAPD, and there's 90-day mail order, are you even talking to your client whether they want to go to retail or do 90-day mail order? A lot of times these health plans, even like if it's Humana, it's CenterWell. If it's, United Healthcare, it's their Optum, division. But a lot of them will have, their 90-day mail orders, which is cheaper for your client. It's convenient. They like it. Sometimes agents don't talk about it. And when they're communicating with your client, they're putting them on those 90-day mail orders. Well, guess what? They become stickier when they start using those services, when they start to know how to look up their claims data. Like if you're a broker and you sign them up on a particular plan, you should be educating your clients on how to download the mobile app, how to see their claims. When you start helping that client with actually utilizing their health plan and knowing how to access care and how to utilize their dental benefit and how to see, and they're actually really a part of that whole process and all the different services they can use, then they're not going to just drop their plan and shop every year and go, oh, this other plan's going to save me $200 next calendar year. They're going to go, I already have the app for this company. I already know how to do everything. I already know how to use my dental. I already know how to access care. I'm good.
Correct. Dan and I both have plans on the books to this day that are over 15 years old. And they're on the same policy that they've been on for 15 years.
That's the truth.
And I'll admit, they're probably not the quote unquote best plan for those people. But what they've done, they trust those companies. Mm-hmm. They know the process. They're comfortable with how it works, and they don't want to.
And you know what's interesting? I was in my office today when Brian was in there, and his caller ID rang, and it was one of my clients. He goes, "You know who this is?" And I go, "Yep, he's up in Logan, Utah. I know exactly who that is." And he's like, "I'm impressed." And that was 15 years ago, but I can honestly tell you he's a guy that I would talk to and say, hey, and every year you'd get on the phone call and be like, there's plans out there that are cheaper, and there's these three, and you would actually save money and the copays are lower. Do you want to switch? No, I'm good.
Yeah.
Because ultimately he knew it's a net difference of $200, $300 per year, and he's like,
I'll take what I know and what I'm happy with and what's working for me. We joke and say there's plans where they could call up the beneficiary and be like, we hate you. We don't want to service you anymore. We hope you die. And they still wouldn't move off the plan just because they're satisfied
it's
on
the
it,
devil
right?
you know versus the devil you don't.
Yeah, and that doesn't necessarily mean that it has the newest, sexiest benefits, but they're happy with the plan. It's worked well for them. They're comfortable with it. They know how the plans work. It's like there definitely is something to be said for that stabilization and that level of comfort there. And what I wanted to wrap with saying is one of the things that I'm really happy with this year with how difficult it's been is just like in a downturn of a real estate market and you see all the realtors, all the bad realtors get out of the industry.
Or how about lending?
Yeah. And then when the market's hot, every college grad and girl and dude and hairdresser now is a realtor, That's how health insurance has been for the past 5 or 6 years. And there's been a lot of low quality agents that have got into the business over the past 5 or 6 years.
You probably just offended some people.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't took shots fired. Not to offend anybody specifically, but I think there's some low caliber agents that don't want to learn the industry. They don't want to learn how these products work. They don't want to do things like listen to this podcast or pay attention. What they wanted to do was basically be enrollers and look on a computer screen and choose a plan and know some base level, surface level information and make a pretty good paycheck.
Right.
And so I'm really excited to see a lot of low acumen, low caliber agents get washed out of the industry and have to go find something else, because I have seen that if you're successful in today's environment, you have to be a much more sophisticated agent. You, like
Right.
Dan said, you have to know all these 8 different carriers or 10 different carriers in your market, the flavor of each one, what's the pros and cons of each one, your market, your networks. You need to know all these things and changes that are going on in the industry right now. And like Dan said, it's much harder than learning how, what the grill features are of the Traeger
Right.
or whatever, or any of these other industries. It literally takes a much more sophisticated agent than almost any other type of sales agent right now. And the industry needs to value these producers, needs to value you all, you agents. And I think long-term we'll recognize that.
I think we will too. And going back to the sales process, and again, if anybody is listening to it, like I can go buy, for example, a TV service where I'm like, oh, I want Fubo, or I want, I don't know, whatever it is. I have YouTube TV, or whatever. But it's like, oh, here's the pricing. Oh, if I want those extra channels, oh, it's this extra dollar amount. So I know what I'm getting by paying that. Oh, and I want to add Sunday Ticket. Of course I added Sunday Ticket. I don't even care how much it is. The NFL could charge me $1,000 a year. I'd still buy Sunday Ticket. But anyways, you know what you're getting with the price. It's very transparent, and the buying process and the decision-making process is very easy. In our industry, it's just not. And not only is it more challenging than ever, like we're talking about, it's like this weird, I always talk about this XY axis that is pissing me off of not only is it more challenging with more plans and everything else, but the broker's being valued even less, So I do want that to change. I do think that
and it's an ever-changing market, an ever-changing industry.
Yeah, and I do think that there are certain carriers and partners out there and people within the supply chain who really do, they get it. Like they get it, they understand it. They're now starting to be a little bit more vocal. They're starting to advocate a little bit more, and we're starting to get a little bit of traction. But I would like to kind of put the, Transformers, or what is it, Voltron, where we got
Autobots.
Unite. Autobots. We all got to really unite.
Yeah, what is the one where the cat's all?
That's Voltron. That's okay. Voltron. We gotta become.
We're saying our age.
We gotta become stronger together, right? All the pieces of Voltron have to come together, almost like the Power Rangers, and just become stronger as an industry.
Unite for the industry.
And really, so if you're out there in the supply chain, you need to raise your hand and educate and spend time teaching people what we really do and how we play a critical role in this industry and how we actually help consumers. So that's my ask, I guess, I'm throwing out there.
It's how to be a good agent. Hopefully you guys are taking some nuggets away from this. Hopefully you guys are helpful.
And you know what? I'm fine. You offended some crappy agents. I hope they get out of the business.
I felt more bad about maybe hairstylists. I didn't mean to take a shot at hairstylists. Sorry. But crappy agents, I don't care if I offended them. No, but none of the agents actually, here's the thing. Self-awareness as an agent is very rare. Most of them don't know or think they're crappy. It's everybody else's problem. It's the industry, it's the carrier, it's the FMO. It's just never them for crappy agents.
Yeah. Anyways, I think we packed in a lot this week, but the moral of the story, I guess this episode, I don't know what we're going to name it, but hey, rocky roads ahead. We're going to continue to have this turbulence. Broker commissions are going to continue to be under scrutiny. But again, the market, there's always a market, and if you have value, there's going to be a market for valuable people in our industry. So make sure that you are creating value for your clients and you are creating value for your insurance carriers that you write business for. And
Absolutely.
And you will always have a place.
Thanks so much, guys. Appreciate you.